Welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast, featuring conversations with practitioners inventing the future of analytics engineering. In this episode, I talked to Kasey Mazza, Analytics Engineering Manager at Hubspot. We recorded at Coalesce 2023, where Kasey is giving a talk titled The Career Growth Software Development Lifecycle. In this conversation, we get into data team org structures, data mesh, career coaching for data practitioners, and a lot more. So without further ado, let's get into it. Kasey Mazza, good morning. We are at Coalesce 23. I appreciate you hanging out.
Thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
You are giving a talk. What's the title of the talk?
The Career Growth Software Development Lifecycle.
Got it. And it's happening on Thursday. We're recording this on Wednesday, but I got a preview of the slides. I think you go through all the different phases of the software development lifecycle and you relate them to career phases. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we took the normal software development lifecycle and applied it to career growth. So thinking that career growth needs to be both intentional and thoughtful. And it's an iterative process. Truly, it's cyclical. So how does it continue to develop over time?
I sometimes annoy people by wanting to peel back the onion too many layers. So when anybody talks to me about career growth, I always want to go back and back and back and back to why. I'm like a 5-year-old asking why so many times. And I love that in one of your slides, you specifically talked about, you had some this equals that. It was career satisfaction equals happier life. Something like that, right? How did you formulate it?
Yeah, exactly. I don't remember the exact wording, but something along the lines of a happier career leads to a happier overall life. The idea that, having a job that you really don't love or don't look forward to is challenging.
Can I ask you where that comes from for you? My guess is that for you to have that belief, it means that at one point in your journey, you maybe didn't feel that. And then at another point in your journey, you did. And now you want other people to have that unlock. Is that you and I just met this morning, but I have to imagine that because you have that perspective, it has some personal resonance for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. I think throughout my career, I studied math in college. And then you kind of get to the end of college and it's what am I going to do with this? It could go a lot of ways, but there's no clear path. And I started taking some analytics courses. So my first job out of school, I learned SQL and took kind of an analytics route right away. But I was still feeling a little bit bored, I would say. That feeling of not looking forward to going to work every day or not feeling totally energized by the work I was doing was something that was kind of gnawing at me.
Have you ever sat in, this is back when we worked in offices, right? Yeah, okay. Have you ever sat in a desk and stared at your screen and just felt like I couldn't care less about analytics when it's satisfying, it's so intensely satisfying.
Yeah.
And when you're disengaged from it, it's just I'm having trouble staying awake right now.
Yeah. And you're just sitting there waiting for 5 p.m. to come.
Yeah,
and you're either done with your work for the day or there's too much work to do. And then I kind of found what we now call analytics engineering, right? By accident. And that was when I kind of felt I could do this 24 hours a day. And I felt very energized by it. So that was maybe a different problem, right? Of how do you balance that? But
was it the different workflow, the different way that it was done? Or was it that you started working on a problem set that you cared more about? What was going on there?
Yeah, I think I was using a different part of my brain, right? Designing something and designing an analytical solution or a model or the infrastructure, as we think about it, it's much more creative than pure analytics, which is answer a question, maybe backfit some data into the question that someone's trying to get you to answer, right? So the creative side of my brain, I felt just much more in a flow versus having one question and answering it and then moving on to the next one. So it was a whole different way of working.
Yeah. I also am not that motivated by any process where you know that the work you're about to do is going to be used one time. And maybe that one time is important, but you're really never going to look at that again. It feels nice to be able to always be building towards something bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And the problem of you build something and then could you make it better? And what can you learn from other people to apply? And then now that we've moved into the world of DBT, that's kind of tenfold, right? Where you can start to use macros and how to use those things to even make your SQL stronger. It's kind of like a never-ending puzzle in a way versus something that you do once and never think about again.
So you hit a point in your career You found analytics engineering. It felt satisfying to you. But the thing that I don't want to let you off the hook, because the thing we started off talking about was that happy career equals happy life. Like, how did that manifest for you outside of work? Here's why I'm curious about this. You're a manager.
Yep.
You have what? Half dozen, like, how many folks report?
7.
7 people report up to you. And my guess is that your job there is not just to help them work on their careers. It's to help them sort out what the hell they even want in their careers, which is, that's not a technical question. It's like a life question. You end up being like a mentor more than anything else.
Definitely. Yeah. I have a lot of career conversations, try to do them with everyone at least quarterly, but sometimes more often. And something I'll ask them is like, what parts of your job do you like? What parts don't you like? But I'll ask like, what other parts of the business or parts of the world are interesting to you that you're not touching? And we'll find projects for them to go outside of our team. So maybe someone on my team would shadow like a software developer that's actually building the Hubspot product, for example. So finding opportunities for them to kind of go out, test out a new skill, and then either come back or be like, no, I actually really like that and I'd like to continue down that path. So it's all kind of a process that we're figuring out together, but I am helping them find the next step, whether it's within my team or without.
The equation for me is always, if I'm energized and engaged at work, then I'm energized and engaged outside of work too.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a fixed amount of excitement and energy. It's like it is a positive feedback loop. And so I think sometimes you get up and go to work every day and you can go through a week, multiple weeks, and not even realize that, I'm like not where I need to be from an energy perspective. And the way that I sometimes actually see it is outside of work. I don't feel motivated to like do a thing that I thought that I'd wanted to do. And anyway, you can like use these two sides of your life as like mirrors to one another.
Definitely. I find when I'm like really drained at work or really burnt out, like I can't even find myself pick up a book, or I can't get myself to a boxing class or a Pilates class. But when work is flowing and things feel good, you have the energy to do those things. And I think it goes both ways, right? So finding a job that is good for you is good for you completely, not just good for your professional career.
Let's go back to your talk. I'm sure that you've been working on the slides, you've been prepping, you're like ready to go on stage. Give us the TLDR. What's the big takeaway?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is you should not be working towards titles or the next step in your career. Think about it as skills and grow specific skills. Think about what you want to learn in that way. Kind of thinking about them like maybe as Pokemon cards or something like that, where you're collecting skills. And then you can use those combination of skills and the things that really excite you to kind of fit that into a title or fit that into a role or an industry, but focusing on what energizes you first and what you're good at, quite frankly, and then using that to grow your career.
If I were going to just play devil's advocate for a minute.
Sure.
That seems like a perspective that takes money out of the equation. Is what you're saying that career satisfaction matters more than anything else? Or that somehow paradoxically, by not caring about titles, you will find that you will achieve titles and money without even that being the focus?
Sure. I think my experience has been the latter of following the things that I'm interested in and passionate about has led me to be more successful. And, you know, there's recognition and growth in that way. But just in general, I'm not saying, you know, quit your job and follow your passion. I think you need to be logical and you need an income. So my advice is like find ways to kind of move within your current role that think about the skills that will help you to grow and then see where that takes you versus throwing everything away and deciding, you know, I'd like to be a fisherman. Maybe be a fisherman on this side while you're being an analytics engineer too. So kind of finding that balance of like, what are you passionate about, but don't, you know, throw away your current role either.
Can you talk to any examples of how you've coached people through different parts of their journey?
Sure. I can give you an example from my own experience and then a coaching example too. I was at a point where I was like, do I want to be a data scientist? You know, it's 2018 and data science.
Everyone's had that question.
It's a buzzy thing, right? I got my master's degree in business analytics, but it was really a data science program. So I was like, all right, this is interesting. And I took on a couple of projects, you know, in my role at HubSpot. I took on a couple of data science projects. I did 2 of them and I was like, I really hate this. The feeling of like, there's no right answer was not good for the way that my brain works. So I had a manager at the time who said, you know, just try that out or just try out being a tech lead and see if you like management. So that's kind of the same approach that I use is try out projects, take on little bits of this work And then you can decide, what path you want to go down before you fully commit to something. So my coaching is a lot of, what do you like doing? What do you wish you were doing more of? I'll show them our project list at the beginning of every quarter and say, what here is interesting to you? What excites you? And trying to assign things in that way.
Do you run a team of analytics engineers?
Yes, all analytics
engineers. Has HubSpot used that title for a while? When did HubSpot start using that title?
2021, I believe.
Interesting.
It's fairly new. Yep. When we started using DBT is when we brought in the title.
Got it. And it has its own career ladder and
it does.
All of it.
Yep. Yeah. So we have kind of what we call a job model. It has, for every level of the role, what skills do you need to have across technical skills, project management skills, communication skills for what defines each level of that role. We probably have about 40 analytics engineers across HubSpot.
And were these people who were previously titled something else? And then when you introduced this role, you said, actually, the thing that you've been doing is more appropriately.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They were all data analysts.
Got it.
Yep.
Interesting.
Which actually gave us some focus internally too, right? Because now we have proper data analysts and proper analytics engineers. So you have clear role definition for both.
My assumption would be that there's a Venn diagram that you still have analytics engineers do analysis and vice versa, but that you spend more of your time on the thing that you are focused on. Is that a true statement?
It's true for some teams. My team is purely analytics engineers. So they actually just build the data and hand it off.
Interesting. Hand it off.
To the analysts.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the contract? How does something become done?
It's a very collaborative process. So they hand us kind of a set of requirements. We work with them to kind of refine and scope. We build the data set and then we'll review with them, make sure they have what they need. And then they'll come back to us usually within a couple of months and say, actually, we also need this, right? But it's a very iterative process. Our teams have very specific groups of stakeholders. So the process feels very collaborative. It's less transactional.
I'm always trying to untangle my own personal preferences versus DBT tends to be pretty opinionated. And I don't want it to be too opinionated because the things that I think that we think aren't necessarily right for everybody. When I hear you talk about this, my initial reaction is to say that, why aren't the analysts just doing the analytics engineering work too? Because that's how I would want to work. I frequently think that less collaboration is better. Collaboration, okay, great. We're recording a podcast right now. I love recording podcasts. I like talking to people, but the bandwidth between our connection right now is actually much slower than the bandwidth going on inside my brain. And so the more that you end up having to talk to other people to get a job done, you can end up slowing down the process. So you want to inject this talking as required, but not excessively. So one of the things that I originally designed DBT around is the idea that if you want to, a person that knows SQL can do the whole process. Why did you choose to break it up?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our analysts that are doing proper analysis are operations folks by nature. So they are doing much more strategic and operational work. And analytics is just kind of a small part of their job, but it's always lived with that group of people. And then we hired our analytics
But their
engineers.
titles are data analysts, not BizOps or something like that.
Some of them are operations analysts.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, great question. So we've always kind of had this separation of roles. I do think we'll evolve to a place where the analytics engineers are doing analytics because it gives them the right business context. They understand more of what they're working towards.
I think that the purely technical role of analytics engineer is very challenging because all the DBT models that I've written in my life, it would be very challenging to know, is this correct?
Right.
If you don't really understand the business process that you're modeling.
Yeah. And then it becomes, you have to ask somebody, is it correct? And they have to do QA and come back to you. And you're right, it takes a lot longer. I do find, though, that there are a lot of members of our team who love just the technical side.
Yep.
If we ask them to do analysis, there would be a little bit of a revolt, I think. So we'll find that balance over time. I think a lot of people could do both. We're kind of working through that. Our teams have evolved where we were all part of a single operations team. About 2 years ago, we pulled out all the analytics engineers and data scientists to a centralized data team.
You were on the operations, in the operations org.
Yeah.
So that's more business attached, and you were not a part of I think in HubSpot, there's a data engineering org. And
Right.
Okay. Got it. That's really interesting that the analytics engineering group kind of came out of the business side of this equation.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're still kind of figuring out how we work with them and uncoupling some of those things that are oh, that team has always done analytics, so they're still doing it, versus is this the best and most optimal way to work? And then, like you said, we have a centralized kind of DevOps team, and they do a lot of like pipeline building and data engineering. So that's completely separate, but we work very closely, of course, with them too.
One of the things that I'd be interested to get your thoughts on is this interplay between org structures and the tooling that enables org structures. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about org structures over the past year because I think that in the past, DBT, because of the fact that it didn't make it easy to split up code bases, inevitably pushed you to have an org structure where like everybody was kind of like centralized and working in the same, code base. I'm curious, HubSpot is a DBT cloud customer. You could start using every one of those features that we announced tomorrow. Did you start thinking at all about mesh and how you might want to align the way that you write and ship code with the way that you're structuring your teams?
Yeah, absolutely. We were taking feverish notes, myself and my coworker Nicholas, yesterday of, we could apply this right now to one of our projects. Contracts are like, our flags were going off of, why are we not using contracts more? But yeah, the data mesh, I think, or the DBT mesh will apply well to HubSpot. We have a centralized analytics team, and then we have a lot of distributed analytics engineers as well. So how do we use the mesh to like unite those people, but also empower them? I think that's going to be the goal. And I see us being pretty big adopters.
It's kind of fun. All of this stuff is, I remember ex-HubSpotter Jillian Corkin always used to use the term socio-technical systems. And it's fun building technology that has real implications for like how humans interact with one another. I was reading notes for a meeting that I'm having later today. And, normally notes on like giving me an update on where a customer is before a meeting are kind of straightforward and dry. And you're like, okay, here's where they're at. Here's the situation on the ground. This set of notes started off by, this is going to be a philosophical conversation about human nature. And I was just like, okay, what the hell is going on here? And it turned out that there were conversations in this company about how much can you trust people to do the right thing? And when, mesh is about empowering a lot more people to do their own stuff. And I would just be curious as to your thoughts on, are you inherently the optimist or the cynic? Like, can people be trusted with powerful tools, or how much governance do you need to give them? Any of this stuff?
Yeah, sure. I am definitely the optimist here, which isn't true in every situation,
Sure.
I'll say, but here definitely. And I think HubSpot has biased me in some ways. We have no employee handbook. We have a general use good judgment philosophy, which is interesting to see scale. But so in general, we built tools. I think the one caveat I'll add is like, you have to give people the right guardrails within those tools, and kind of either whether it's, here's how our project structure works, or something even as simple as that, so it doesn't turn into chaos right away. But I think generally, if you give people the tools, give them the right guardrails. We, when we adopted DBT, we did it as a completely distributed team. So there were analytics engineers across HubSpot that I had never met, but we were all working on the same project, and you needed some degree of kind of alignment there. But we still were very empowered to use the tool in the way that we felt best.
How does it work? Who makes the final decision on whether a PR gets approved?
That was a hard problem for us for probably about 2 years.
Yeah, it's like if you have this like heavily peer-to-peer based system, somebody has to say yes or no.
Right. Yeah. And it turned into someone would say yes and someone else would disagree, right? And then you'd have things in the code base that not everybody agreed with. Some person would want to change our naming conventions to be snake case, and everyone else wanted to be, we had a lot of our table names or schema names were all one word and with no chaos, right?
I would quit. I'm out.
So we had someone who was like, let's make them all snake case, which looking back was the logical decision. But I was like, I've been using these tables for 3-4 years and I know what they're called, and you're changing them. So that was like a lot of hard decisions, but they were happening at the individual level. We needed some more direction there. So we've hired a VP of data since, and we have, a data strategy team. So those things are coming into place, but it was an interesting order to adopt them, I would say.
I think the only appropriate way to name tables is to do it the way that SAP does it, and have really long German names for the tables, and have a Word doc that translates a really long German name into the 3-letter abbreviation that is actually in the schema. And then you have to look up the cross-reference every time you want to select.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Peak efficiency.
So you added a VP of data to provide some central governance, but you did it like multiple years into your journey.
Yeah.
that had to be interesting. I want to have that person on and have them talk about the situation on the ground when they showed up. Because that sounds like an interesting thing to walk into.
6 months into the role right now, and I'm sure he has days where he's like, wow, this is not what I expected, right? But also like he's bringing years of experience and vision that are helping us kind of move forward and kind of all be rowing in the same direction. So he's been wonderful. But like I said, probably a little late on hiring him versus when we had started. We wouldn't be in kind of some of the tech debt situations we're in.
Okay. How many analytics engineers? How many DBT users across the company?
We have about 75 dev licenses and 150 total users.
Okay. So 150 people using DBT, all collaborating on a shared DAG. What do you think the biggest organizational hurdles are today? Like, where are your pain points and what kinds of things are you trying to solve?
When we moved on to DBT, we did a big lift and shift, and we were like, we'll refactor everything as we go, which we're doing slowly. But we have, I think, set up a lot of tests and things like that fail. So we're not always running our tests in production. Yeah. That will be a huge hurdle for us once we can overcome that. And then I think the other thing is just being more consistent across our teams. So we have one big project right now, but everybody has their own subfolder. Some of them live in our models folder and some of them live in our marts folder. Why did we do that? So we have some things I think to organize on, and then to make sure we're not duplicating things across teams.
Yeah.
The finance team will build a model and we'll build pretty much the same thing. So how do we get a little bit smarter about that? We could really benefit from like a big DAG audit and find redundancies.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about if you do service-oriented architecture and two pizza teams really well, that everybody has to answer a question, which is to say that when a downstream team starts to use one of my APIs, their success becomes dependent on this API. But it might not be that my success as a team is that related to it. Let's say in this case, your team is primarily focused on RevOps, is that right?
Yep, customer success.
Customer success. And there's the finance team. And what if you had a meeting with the finance team and you were like, look, your model does a bunch of things that ours doesn't. If we incorporate these two features into your model, like great, we'll just kind of combine them. And that becomes a part of their code base and they maintain that and you reference it instead of author it. Great. There's less duplicated code. Now, all of a sudden you've now created a dependency between the two teams. And I think that it's like the correct thing to do, but it's a little bit like what you were talking about before with like who decides whether the PR goes in. There's not actually an answer, like a globally correct answer to the question, like how do you make sure that they act as a good steward of that API? But I think that we're going to have to create cultural, behavioral norms. There's the technical version of a contract, but then there's the societal, social version of a contract that I think everybody's going to have to figure out how that works for them.
Yeah, for sure. We're very fortunate at HubSpot that like the analytics engineers tend to be very open-minded and collaborative. We very rarely have a time where we either disagree or someone deprecates something that we really were relying on. But that took a lot of like community building events. We did years of analytics.
How do you do that? Do you get all 150 people together? And
we did for a long time. We've kind of pulled back on some of those events just as the team has grown so much. And we've centralized a lot of the analytics engineers too. But we did quarterly analytics engineering meetups that people were either showcasing work or there was a networking component. Probably did that for 4 years or so because we were realizing like, we were all doing the same thing in silos. So that was really helpful.
That's amazing. And I think that every company should be doing things like this, building internal community. There's also this question, and we've faced this in our own internal data team. How much of the bandwidth of a given team is dedicated to forward progress and how much of it is dedicated to maintainership? Maintainership can be a bunch of different things. It could be optimizing performance or spend. It could be how do I make sure that I've got this series of requests from downstream teams that like aren't really related to my KPIs, but they're depending on me. And so I feel like at some level, you have to make decisions on a percentage basis. Like 50% of our time is dedicated to our stakeholders and the things on their roadmap. And then X% of the time is, whatever. Do you think in these terms?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We are very clear about, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I'll say like 20% of our time is on what we call mainsail work. So core infrastructure, efficiency, we love sea metaphors at HubSpot. So the main sail is like kind of our critical functionality and our core work. So that's security, privacy, legal, all that stuff falls under mainsail. But for our team, it's a lot of efficiency, cleaning up tech debt. And we spent about 50% of our time on the work that's moving the business forward. So really delivering for our stakeholders and their key priorities for the year. And then we spend 30% of our time on reactive work. So something is broken, somebody has a question, somebody can't find something, with the goal of ever decreasing the reactive work.
Yeah. It's really interesting. We started the conversation off talking about roles, data analysts, analytics engineers. I think that one of the ways that those two roles start to diverge is these percentages. I think that, and you saw this with software engineering over the course of the 2 decades that I've been involved with this, is like in the early 2000s, software engineers were really managed very similarly to the way that data analysts are often managed today, which is to say, like, you had some non-technical person kind of creating a list and saying, like, go run around and do these things. And essentially 100% of a software engineer's time was that. And over time, we've developed the cultural idea that you want to give software engineers problems and not lists of freaking tasks to do.
Yep.
And they can then use that additional degree of freedom to like build scalable, maintainable systems while also creating forward momentum for the business. And I feel like analytics engineering is moving on that trajectory. And I think a big part of that is like carving out time that is explicitly not governed by your business stakeholder.
Yeah, we make sure that we have as much input to our roadmap as our stakeholders do, which I think is critical. We're in a period of kind of rebuild and refactor. I think this year and next year we'll be really building the foundations. And then we'll kind of reconsider where those percentages will be. But for now, we have a lot of work to do on getting rid of, things that aren't even being used, right?
You got here when?
Saturday, actually.
Saturday. You've been in San Diego for a couple of days. Is this your first Coalesce?
No, I attended last year.
Cool. How do you feel about the event this year?
Excellent. It's been wonderful. The energy is so good. We were just actually talking at breakfast, and everything feels so smooth and so well run, which is like really impressive with just one cycle, right? Last year in New Orleans was the first in-person Coalesce. And man, everything is just so smooth. The sessions are so good, and the people are great.
I'm really glad to hear that. I miss the jazz a little bit,
yeah.
But the weather here is wonderful. It's been great to spend time in San Diego. Last question. We use this to close out all of our episodes. What do you hope? This is not a what do you think. What do you hope is true the data industry in 10 years?
I'm hoping that executives in the C-suite will see the value much more than they do today. I think we spend a lot of time.
This is the new. Okay, I want to hear more about this.
I think we spend a lot of time explaining why what we're doing matters and how we're impacting the business, because it's often like we built the data set that improved revenue, but we didn't actually improve the revenue. So we spend a lot of time kind of telling that story. I'm looking forward to a world where the execs truly get it. And I think we're starting to see those data-minded folks in those positions, but that's what I'm looking forward to.
HubSpot has made a huge investment in data. So
Yes.
like you've clearly got believers, but you feel like you have to like continue to surface those wins and the impact.
Yeah, I think they see it, right? But they see it for the benefit of automation or for the benefit of AI. So they're seeing kind of the next layer above us versus seeing data purely as such a valuable asset.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. This
Thanks
has been
for
a lot
having me.
of fun.
It's wonderful.
Enjoy the rest of your time here.
Thanks so much.
The Analytics Engineering Podcast is sponsored by DBT Labs and is hosted by Tristan Handy and myself, Julia Schottenstein. Have comments, questions, or guest suggestions? Email us at podcast@dbtlabs.com. Our producers are Jeff Fox and Dan Poppy. If you enjoy the show, please drop a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening.